Hey everyone, welcome to Open Books with Alana and Erin, two female leaders modernizing the leadership and accounting space. Today's topic can be a little tense, maybe is the right word. It strikes close to home, especially like I struggle with this a lot. And what we're going to be talking about is accepting criticism and realizing all the stuff that comes with criticism. It's often a knee-jerk reaction to take criticism negatively as a personal attack, and I think that's just part of being human.
Yeah. Yep.
But as servant leaders, this is something that we really need to think about, and kind of a core tenet of servant leadership in itself.
Agreed.
How we take criticism.
Yep.
Learning to push past that initial knee-jerk reaction and move beyond it. So that's our topic today.
Yeah,
You ready to dig in?
I am. Yep.
So can you share an experience where you received some criticism and it caused some growth for you?
Yeah. When you asked this question, I got to thinking about, what is one piece of criticism that stands out to me. And I had so many that started to come to me. And so then I started thinking through, well, what do many of those situations have in common? And I don't know that I can pick out a specific moment of this is where I grew the most. But for me, what I saw in the situations when I did see the most growth was that it was a critical piece of criticism, I would say, that applied to both my personal life and my professional life. So I think what's really interesting is when you accept or listen to feedback in the professional world, you can apply it personally as well, or when you have criticism in your personal life, to bring that into work. Because we've talked about before in previous episodes of being your whole self at work. And so I don't have a specific example, but what I can say is when, like many years ago in my personal life, I had some criticism about like how I deal with conflict. And in learning how I deal with conflict in my personal life, I applied that then into my professional life. And that's where I grew significantly.
Wow.
But it wasn't just the growth professionally for me.
Right.
It's because it was how I dealt with conflict just in totality of, who I am. And so I think what I've learned with criticism is not just letting it stay at work or just accepting the criticism in your personal life, but evaluating all relationships that you have professionally and personally, I think is really important.
I love that.
Yeah.
I haven't thought about applying it vice versa, like the stuff I learned in my personal life and applying that. But it's such a good point about being your authentic self.
For sure.
I love that.
Yeah. But I think, and you kind of alluded to this in the beginning, you have to be open to accepting that, like, okay, something that was brought up for me in my personal life, maybe it impacts how I'm dealing with things at work. And so you have to be open to even exploring that possibility, right? Yeah. Which is hard. Yeah, totally. So what's a situation that you've had feedback and then you've seen growth from that?
Yeah. So this one is actually fairly recent.
Okay.
We had some changes in the firm and got some feedback. It wasn't like a strict, like, hey, this is some constructive criticism for you, or this is some feedback for you. It's more just how something was happening and how the team was approaching something. And of course, my initial reaction, I'm coming up with excuses and reasons and getting very defensive. And it took me a couple weeks to kind of work past that and realize, like, no, we haven't been failing forever. Like, this is just a way for us to be better. I need to accept this, really internalize it, and think about where I can improve.
Okay.
And so it really was one of the first times where I consciously made that, like, it's not a personal attack. It is how we get better as a team. And then verbalized that to my team members.
Okay.
Because they can see the frustration and the maybe hurt feelings a bit.
Yeah.
You just pick up that stuff when you're having a conversation.
Yep.
So by like acknowledging it and saying it out loud, I think was good for me to just actually grasp it and move forward with this growth of, hey, this is where we can improve. This is what we can do. And then letting the rest of the team see that and for them to experience the same thing.
Sure.
That like, hey, it's not a bad thing to point out what isn't working.
Yep.
Right? Like, it's okay. And it's okay to feel that initial, like, oh, defensive. Mm-hmm. You're coming after me. I don't know how to respond. I have all these excuses for why. But it really doesn't matter if it's just making everyone better in the long run.
Yeah.
So that was a more recent thing where I think I've internalized that before, but never really spoke it out loud.
Sure.
So that one for me was hard, hurt, but got through it. And now, like, I feel like we're in a better place. I can recognize the things that we put in place to make our product and our team stronger. So, you know, it's good, but painful at the beginning.
Hard to get there. And what's interesting, I guess, about that one is you probably, or I would assume, have to separate, like, they're not necessarily criticism to you specifically, but like it's just talking about the greater process.
Yes.
But it's hard to not take that personally.
Totally is. Especially as servant leaders, we kind of put ourselves and our emotions out there because we do want to be very empathetic and really involve our emotional and mental selves with our team. So it's really easy to take that personally and think like you are the worst person ever. The month of July I like to say that I was draining through the pit of despair. It was a really hard struggle, but coming out of it, like, I'm glad we went through that because for me, like, it really became about how do we make ourselves stronger as a team. And it wasn't like, oh, you are a horrible person because you can't do this, this, and this.
Yep.
It totally, I mean, it took time to work through it, but in the end, I feel like we're so much stronger coming out of it.
So do you feel like that situation helped to create that environment of having the honest feedback with your team?
Yeah, that willingness to be open and say like, hey, I didn't think about this before, or yes, thank you for that, you know, piece of feedback, because this is how we can take it, make it actionable, and apply it and make our future product better.
Yep.
And I think acknowledging that, ooh, that hurt a little bit at the beginning makes it okay for the rest of the team to acknowledge their own hurt. Like, okay, sometimes things are a little tender, like a little bruise.
Yep, totally.
You keep pressing on it.
Stop.
And I think just that willingness to be open and say like, hey, you know, I at first was a little frustrated or definitely hurt my feelings a little bit.
Yep.
Like that was my initial reaction, but let's see what we can do with this. And having that, just having that conversation and saying it out loud.
Yeah.
I think helps create that environment.
I agree.
How do you create that environment?
I very much the transparency that you just spoke about, but I also find that by leaning into like, no person is perfect. Like, and you know, we talk about that quite a bit, but like everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and a weakness isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
But just being honest with like, we all bring both sides of that to work. Nobody's perfect. I myself am not perfect. And I think for myself, just leaning into and communicating, like when something's brought up, just like, I know that that's not in my wheelhouse, or like, I know that when we look at, you know, my general dynamic, that's something I struggle with. Being able to communicate that and just even share what I'm doing to work on something, you know, of like, hey, yeah, I recognize I didn't follow up on that. I'm learning that, you know, I've got to get a better system in place. So just being honest with like, I also have weaknesses and here's what I'm doing to try and fix that. Because I think it's important for team members to know like everyone has places they can improve.
Right.
And even in different situations, you can have a different area where you need to improve. So a strength in one area might be a weakness in another.
Yeah.
And not everything translates 100% of the time. So just being honest with that, I think, is really important.
I really like that, acknowledging that we have strengths and weaknesses, because that can be hard to acknowledge that weakness in front of other people.
Yeah.
Or even like if you have team members across like two different team members in different teams or weak pods.
Yeah.
And how they're communicating back and forth and kind of facilitating some of that conversation and acknowledging that, yes, we all have our strengths and weaknesses, can help it can reduce friction.
Yes.
I guess is the best way to word it. It can just reduce some of that friction caused by those personal feelings. If we're all acknowledging like, hey, I'm really good at this thing, but I really struggle and need help with this.
Yeah.
Then they're more like, okay, I have my own strengths. I have my own weaknesses. Let's smooth out that communication a bit.
Totally. And I think also just sharing like what led to maybe the action that somebody made, or, you know, how somebody communicates, like the why behind that, I think helps other team members of like, don't look at what happened, but look at why it's happening, because they might be looking for a connection, and maybe it's just coming across differently than what you would normally share on your end. So I think helping to explain like why something's coming across a certain way is also important.
Kind of hopping right off of that, of kind of explaining why something is coming forward. There is constructive criticism, and then there is also unhelpful feedback. How do you recognize those and kind of tame the wild beast of unhelpful feedback?
Yeah. So I can't remember in what book, but Brené Brown talks about not accepting criticism from somebody who won't get in the ring. And that's something that I fall back to a lot, just in my career journey, but especially in my leadership journey. Because a while ago, I learned that criticism, if it deeply hurts, it means one of two things, generally. It means one, it's either very true and it strikes a chord with you, or it's hurtful. And so I find that when criticism immediately stings, I know it's one of those two things. And so then I kind of dig into that deeper and evaluate, okay, is it because it's something that I know I need to work on and I understand it's standing in my way, so that goes in one bucket, or separately, is it unhelpful and it's coming from someone who's not willing to put themselves in the ring with me and, you know, lead the game essentially. So it's really helpful for me to go back to that saying from Brené Brown and really understand, you know, if I wouldn't accept like this person's opinion because they're not playing the game with me. And by playing the game, I mean like putting themselves in front and exposing, you know, who they are to try and lead a team. If they're not willing to do that, then, you know, does their constructive or their feedback, is there any, you know, any weight to it, I guess is what I would say. Yeah. What about you?
I find unhelpful feedback is usually pretty easy to suss out.
Sure.
And usually I can trigger that like identifier by starting to ask the questions around what a solution would be.
Okay.
So if they're talking about something that's going on, giving some feedback about a specific process, let's say, and I start asking some open-ended questions about like, well, what are your thoughts around this, and this? And if they are just like, I don't know, I just know it's not working now, I'm like, probably not the most helpful. I will listen to it and I'll take note of it, but very similar to yours, where if they aren't going to come to me and help me find a solution, then I'm not sure it's the most helpful. Having said that, I fully understand that there are times where people need to vent.
Sure.
I think we've talked about it before. Like Sarah and Chris are my two people that like, I'm like steam, bubbling, boiling, and I just need to get that out. And then I can focus on a solution. And sometimes people just need that space. But once I start asking those questions of how can I help you, or how can we get to this point together? If they aren't willing to kind of help me there, I'm like, okay, we need to take a break. We need to revisit this another time. Let's talk about it next week.
Yep.
Because it's not helpful.
Totally.
It's just talking for talking's sake.
Totally. And I think to that point, when you talk about like feedback, like on a process or something, sometimes it also is just a matter of like, okay, I understand in a perfect world, somebody's coming to me with criticism. Yes, in a perfect world, love that. I would love to be able to do X, Y, and Z. But let's take a step back. Are we doing the best we can within the constraints of what we have?
Yeah.
And I think to that, of sussing out, like, is it helpful or constructive, or not helpful? I think part of it too is like explaining or helping the other person see, like, yeah, perfect world, love to do that. Here's the constraints I'm working in. Do you still see that this isn't effective?
Right.
Which I think is really important.
Oh, so important and so reflective of exactly what happened in like July when I was talking about that. Like, there are the ideals, what we would love to happen so that we can do things the most efficiently, have the best product ever there, have the best advising meetings and all of that. But we are in the real world and we are all human, which means we err. We do not do things right all the time. Right. Our clients don't. We don't. Like, there are too many variables. It's never going to be perfect. Yep. We might get close, but it's never going to be perfect. And I think that's really hard for my team member who has a bit of OCD, wants it to be perfect all the time. And it's been a real struggle for her to kind of like, okay, we do have to work with what we have. And we've had many a conversation about like, in the ideal world, that'd be great. I would love to do all this stuff. But we are in the real world and things are never as smooth as we would love them to be.
Totally. And there's also a difference between something going well versus something being your way. And so something can be good without it being your way. And I think sometimes feedback can come across as the other person needing more of it being their way, how they would do something, which is great. I love to hear that. But we also have to understand that with so many team members and personalities, just because something wasn't exactly how you would handle it doesn't mean that it still wasn't very good.
That is so applicable to accounting as well.
Agreed.
And like the tax world, even the bookkeeping world, like what's the right way? Well, there's a lot of right ways to do something depending on the situation, right? Or what's happening. So definitely being willing to take that perfect ideal, well, it's only this way, it's only my way. It's like, well, maybe it works better a different way for someone else.
Yep, exactly.
But being open to that, I think, is truly important.
It is.
In having those conversations. And that's where you can kind of determine whether that feedback that you're getting is constructive or maybe not so much.
Yeah, that's really important. Yeah. What's something that you've learned from either a mentor or a team member on feedback?
So this one was the July thing, and it was that you don't have to have. I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. This team member, even though they brought something to me and it hurt and it was painful, it was for the improvement and the better of the firm and our clients and our team. And it took me a while to see that, just because I was still reeling in all the pain. But I know, like, I think about myself and doing things for the firm, for the clients. And I'm like, yes, that's like my end goal. That's what I want. I want my team to be happy. I want clients to be happy. But I don't necessarily think that my team members are operating under that same thing. And she came to me, we were in one of our many conversations. That was like her grounding ideal around making the feedback and the constructive criticism came from this place of wanting better for everyone.
Sure.
And it was just that, like, I recognize that. I see you in that. We want the same thing.
Yeah.
And it was nice to have her be the one to actually verbalize it to me so I could internalize that. And now when I'm having conversations with other team members, I'm going off of that same the same thought process that she did. That they're coming from a place of wanting better for the team and the firm and the clients, even though that may not be the case. But if I think about it that way in my head, I find that I'm much more likely to get past the hurt first and then look at a solution.
Sure, with a clear head.
So learned that from my colleague not that long ago, and it's been interesting.
Yeah.
How about you?
Mine has just, I've learned from a mentor in a different industry, just that thought process of, like, if something hurts, really think through if it's because it's very close to your heart or something you need to work on. So they're kind of striking that chord, or if it's because it's coming from someone unhelpful.
Yeah.
And then there's just that idea of, like, do you open the door to accepting that criticism, or are you closing it because it's unhelpful? I'm hearing what they have to say, but, like, that's where I'm going to leave it. So I think just being able to walk through kind of those two sides of the coin is really important. Something that I learned and I'm continuing to explore how to do, because it can be hard in the moment, like when it's a long day and, it's a never ending process of getting feedback.
Yes.
And so it always seems to strike on a long day, but still having the bandwidth to be able to evaluate. Yeah. Is it effective or is it not?
Yeah. It's always the stuff that you need to work on, but has been put on it's in the important but not urgent box.
Yes.
Until the feedback comes, and then it's important and urgent.
Yes.
I find that's most of the stuff. It's like, I know I need to be working on this.
Yep.
But right now I've got fires I have to put out. It's such a struggle to balance.
It is.
We all keep looking for more time, and we never find it.
No, and it's also not fun. So it's like, if I can't avoid that, I will.
Back burner, parking lot. We're going to put a pin in it.
I hear you. Thank you. I'll deal with it later. It can be so hard.
And then it blows up in your face.
Exactly.
That's what usually happens to me. I'm like, great. Now I have to deal with it.
Yeah. This will come back around.
Yeah. And bite you in the ass.
Every time. Yep.
So that kind of ties in with my, like, what would I tell myself? It's humility. Like, just because someone is bringing something to you does not mean that it is a personal attack. It's like, you don't have to come up with all of these excuses and reasons. You can just acknowledge that, you aren't doing the best you can.
Yeah.
Here, let's look at a solution and move forward. Like, you don't need to spend nights in bed staring at the ceiling about how horrible this is.
Yeah.
Like, no, we can find a solution. Let's work forward. And I think I would have saved myself a lot of sleepless nights.
Yeah.
And just pain in general. If I didn't be wrong with my whole chest out, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
If I actually, like, I will take this criticism and I will think through it, process it.
Yeah.
Okay, here's my solution. Rather than immediately being defensive and I must protect myself.
Yeah.
And I think part of that, kind of into a topic we haven't really discussed, but being a young woman in the accounting field, like, I felt like I had to prove everything. Yeah. So any slight bit of feedback or criticism, it was like, no, this is why, when maybe I needed to think through things a bit more.
I hear you. Yeah.
What would you have told yourself?
Mine is just the general process of being able to accept criticism. I think it's so important, no matter what role you fill in an organization or, what role you have in your personal world as well. Accepting criticism and being able to, like, critically think through criticism that is coming to you is just so important. it's especially important on a leadership journey, especially servant leadership, like you talked about in the beginning of the episode. Being able to face your weaknesses and work with your team members when they come to you with feedback about your own self. If you're not willing to go through that journey, I think it's severely going to limit your leadership ability. And it's like we've talked about a couple times, it's not fun always, and it can be hard. It's a hard process. But I truly think some of the best leaders know how to accept criticism, but also know how to analyze the criticism they're getting, and they don't listen to every single piece that's coming in. Because I think that's a huge component to it, is that you're not just following any feedback that comes in, but you're actually critically thinking through it, making sure it applies, and making sure that it's making you the most effective in whatever role that you're serving. So just learning how to do that early on in your career makes it a lot easier once you find yourself down the road with team members reporting to you. And so.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Open Books. We aim to share insights gained from our past and future experiences to foster growth within the leadership and accounting communities. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.